Welcome to another version of our ENO8 Answers live workshop series. This is a regular webinar / workshop that we do where we select different topics that come up a lot with our clients and also with potential clients that we talk with. So we try to pick these questions that show up a lot and then just deep dive on those a little bit more in these sessions. And so one that we picked today that comes up quite a bit is when you're facing down a potential rebuild of your product. And rebuilds can come up in lots of different circumstances, but I think what we wanted to try to cover today are what are 6 signs that you're potentially facing down a rebuild of your product, like total rebuild or a significant rebuild of part of it. And so we'll talk mostly about, what are the signs that could be showing up that would indicate maybe that's something that you're facing in the future. And then we'll talk about, a couple considerations if you think you're going to be going down that path. So just a little bit about me. My name's Jeff Francis. I'm one of the co-founders of ENO8. We're a digital innovation studio based in Dallas, Texas. We're an Inc. 5000 company. I've worked on launching more than 200 different digital products over the years, probably quite a bit more than that. And so got a lot of experience, made a lot of mistakes that I'm completely open of talking about. And I think I'm excited to do this session with you guys today and talk about a topic that really does come up a whole lot. So why don't we just dive right in? So we talked about what are the 6 signs that you're potentially facing a significant rebuild or a total rebuild. The first one that I thought I would talk about is that you've taken the wrong technical approach. And this sort of shows itself in architecture type of problems or tech stack problems. And so some things to look for here where this might be happening is often it shows up when you're spending a great deal of your effort in terms of time and resources and money and attention towards things that aren't really moving the product forward or adding additional value to the product. Constantly dealing with issues, making changes to the product are real complex and cumbersome or risky. A lot of times that is something that can kind of point to potential architectural problems. I heard a story several years ago that I like to talk about when this kind of thing comes up is one of the founding team members of AWS was giving this presentation at a big conference a few years ago. And he was talking about what sort of led them to decide to build AWS originally. And it was sort of this type of thing. It was a little bit more related to infrastructure, but I think the theme still relates. They were talking about that 80% of their time and energy was going to just kind of keeping things running, right? Or maintaining or fixing things. And only about 20% of their time and resources were spent on actually like adding new valuable features and options for customers. And so they thought there's got to be a better way where we can flip this cost equation. Instead of 80% of it going to just sort of keep the lights on, how can we flip it to where maybe only 20% of our resources are going towards keeping the lights on or keeping things running, and 80% of it instead is going towards adding value to the product and moving the product forward and adding new value for users. And so that's sort of what triggered them to look at building AWS and moving their stuff to sort of their own infrastructure. And so I think that's one thing that you can look for here is how much of your time is going to just sort of patching issues, fixing things, trying to navigate messiness in your architecture or your original approach. And so that could be one of the big signs that shows up. The next one is maybe your tech was fine, but it's outdated, right? And this happens a lot. There's a lot of products that have been really successful. They get a little bit older in their life cycle, and the tech that was good for then may not be the best for where you are now, or even more so for where you're wanting to go in the future. And so a lot of times, everyone from the original team is gone, right? So you're having to read in new team members to get familiar with the system and sort of this legacy tech and legacy way that things are built. And that can cause a lot of potential issues. So one of the signs that shows up when this is an issue is you're having trouble finding resources, right? Really good developers like to stay somewhat modern on what they're working with, right? Because that's where the market is going. And so as sort of technologies age, the pool of potential resources shrinks, right? And so it gets harder to find resources. And then, like I said, the ramp up time once you find resources could be really high, especially if you're having to sort of reskill or cross-train somebody to get more familiar with something that they either haven't worked with in a long time or maybe they haven't worked with at all. And so sometimes I get asked about what are typical ramp up times for different types of developers. There's not of course like a hard and fast rule on that, but just to give a little bit of guidance, because we get asked about it a little bit, is I think about it in terms of what's the level of the engineer. So if they're fresh out of college, it could take, month and a half to get them to the point where they're ramped up, familiar with things and comfortable making changes, and they're pretty efficient in terms of completing tasks. A little bit more experience to that would be they're still a little bit green. They've worked on other projects. They've worked on that specific stack before. Maybe you're looking at, 3 weeks to 4 weeks, maybe a month. Mid-level developers, I think 2 weeks ramp up is a pretty comfortable time frame. Experienced, maybe a week, and then somebody super senior, super relevant experience, a couple of days, they should be able to get in and work efficiently, right? The other sign that relates to this is your application takes an extremely long time to do deployments, right? So when you're doing work and you're doing rollouts of those, if you're noticing that there's a whole lot of friction in that process, or it takes a really long time to do it, sometimes that can be related to the stack or the tech that you're using. And it can also sometimes relate to the technical approach that we talked about on that previous slide. What I encounter a lot of times is when there's a sort of a flawed architecture, or the stack's not very clean or modern, you have to plan a whole lot more for doing production releases, or else it's really risky. There may be a lot of manual steps in the process to deploy, so you probably are not using a lot of automation, which is really important as your product matures, because it allows you to go a whole lot faster and release a lot more often without introducing a whole lot of risk of destabilizing the product. And so that's a warning sign to look for. Another one could be that there's an inability to add certain features or integrate with other sort of third-party products or services, because the effort or the lift to do that integration is a lot. Maybe you got to create wrappers, you got to do a lot of extra custom coding to just sort of bridge the gap. That's something that will show up quite a bit. Another one is lack of scalability, right? Just handling your potentially growing workload. The goal of building a really successful product is that you're adding users, you're adding customers, the load on the system is growing. And we talk to a lot of clients that's one of the big things that keeps them up at night, is we're growing really fast. We have a really successful product, but we're afraid that we're going to hit a wall. We can't bring on new customers, or it's going to become unstable, and it's really going to impact our customers' experience and our retention. And so, one other example I'll throw out here is we had a client that they built a really great product. It relates a little bit to the technical approach and to the stack potentially, but the path they went down originally with their product, they built a terrific application that customers loved. But the problem was they had some key misses in being able to construct the system so that they could easily add other additional customers. And so there was this really tough, effort-intensive cycle just to onboard customers. And so it ultimately got to the point where they just could not sign up new customers, and they had to sort of re-architect the platform so that it was multi-tenant and it was easier to onboard and configure new clients. So that could be a way that it shows up as well. The other one here is that maybe the tech was fine then, but times have changed, is platform, right? Where are your users utilizing the application? And is the original premise of what platform you chose to build for still the right way to meet the user. So if take, for instance, over the last decade, mobile's really changed a lot about where and how people interact with products that perhaps have different user experiences. And so if your application was built as a desktop Windows application, that may not fit the needs of today's user very well. Or you may have built it as a web application that was designed only for desktop, but they're really using it on mobile devices a lot more. So those could be things that show up here too. And that's sometimes not a really easy shift to be able to shift that user experience or that target platform, from web to, more of a mobile or a tablet form factor, right? The next one is, instability. This is a really big one. This one shows up, and this is probably one of the bigger warning signs that you may have some issues or that are going to require some kind of a significant rebuild. When I talk about instability, what I'm referring to is just general stability of the system, its performance from a user perspective, but also stability on making changes, right? You're growing the product capabilities, you're trying to add value for your customers, but if you're breaking the system every time that you're introducing those new updates and changes to the point where you're afraid to push updates, that's a really big warning sign that you really need to take a harder look at, right? And a lot of the reason that will show up, especially on older products, is there's a lot of interdependencies in legacy code. And so one of the examples that we frequently see is where an application was built maybe as what was called like a monolith or a monolithic application, where everything's very tightly coupled. If you change one thing, it affects a lot of other things. Versus something that's a little bit more modern, like a microservices or a serverless approach, where it's a little easier to work on a specific element of the application without it really touching or affecting a lot of things downstream or across the platform. So some things to look at there if you're really afraid or you feel like you're playing whack-a-mole whenever you push an update or you make a change because instability, that's a big warning sign, right? Next would be it's just slow and expensive to maintain the code, right? This relates a little bit to the earlier one about that, maybe the stack was good then, but it's not good now. But the way it shows up is the effort to go execute a change doesn't seem right for like the level or complexity of the feature, right? So again, this can lead to having trouble finding resources that fit your stack or fit your platform or that want to touch it anymore. Sometimes even if you can find those resources that are a little bit more rare, it's going to be a higher bill rate, right? They're harder to come by, so it's going to be a little bit expensive, and it's kind of considered a little bit more of a like a niche skill set. One other mention on the stack, sometimes you see certain frameworks that get used within sort of a stack that aren't real highly adopted. And so that can cause some issues too, like those specific frameworks within the larger stack. And then let's see, let me think if there's anything else here that on my notes that I wanted to cover here. Yeah, I think finding developers is one of the big ones where this shows up. And then, just the slow and expensive. So when you're having to play whack-a-mole, if you're pushing a release and you're afraid of instability, you end up taking a lot more time in that release cycle. So you have to regression test a whole lot more. You have to do a lot more monitoring. And then usually what will happen is there's a lot more fire drills. Like after you release it, there's issues. And then all of your attention goes away from the proactive stuff and goes to the reactive stuff, right? So if you're doing that a lot, that's probably a warning sign. The other one here is not really technology related. This is really more about as your product is out there longer, you get a better visibility of what the user need is and what the market need is. And sometimes that changes. So maybe a product that did a very good job when it was initially launched, it did a very good job then of targeting a painful problem or a big need that the users are needing and addressing that market well. Over time, you get a better understanding of that market and those users, and you get a better view of what's next, what are they shifting to, what new alternatives are entering the market space, what are they asking for, and how are those needs changing. So as you get a better feel for that, it could be a significant enough change that you may need to look at a significant rebuild. Now, rebuilds can kind of come, a couple of different flavors. One of them is very tech focused, right? The other one could be more product or product strategy focused, and the other one that's probably worth mentioning is user experience focused, right? UX and design changes over time. And so what users expect from those interfaces and those user experiences also change. And so if you have a really old user experience or visual design in your product, you in order to address that for the users, that might be a significant, more front end focused rebuild. And then that sort of triggers some of the other issues. If you're looking at a significant front end rebuild and you have this tightly coupled application that doesn't use more broken out services or tiering so that you can make that change a little more efficiently, then you're going to end up having to reach really deep into the application to make changes. So it may start with a UX rebuild, but ultimately where you end up is you're going to have to do sort of a complete or a more significant rebuild than you thought, just to address sort of front end user experience or flow changes. So the next one here is, it's time to upgrade from sort of your MLP, your minimum lovable product, or your MVP to more of a full V1. And so this situation shows up a little bit more in a scenario where maybe it's a startup or it's a new product that's been built, within a larger enterprise. And the original goals of the product were validation, right? So if your goal is validation and you haven't gotten that yet, it's an unproven product, those objectives are different than when it's a validated product that actually has traction. Normally, the name of the game in that early phase is I want to be very selective and limited about how much I invest in building this because the risk is really high, right? Later on, when it's a validated product, you got a lot of steady users, you've built maybe your monthly recurring revenue. If it's in a sort of a SaaS situation, then the risk profile changes and you may need to revisit your original premise. Sometimes it is smart to build something a certain way, especially from a technology standpoint early on, because it might have limitations in the future, but you're willing to take that trade-off because the cost effectiveness in the early stages is so compelling that you're willing to take that on, get the validation, and then you can face a rebuild later on down the road with a different risk profile. So just something to keep out is why did you make the choices that you originally made? And was it intended to be sort of a full lifetime choice, especially from like a tech stack or an architecture standpoint? And make sure that you're not continuing to build a more stable long-term roadmap on the foundation of something that was really intended to just get you to validation, right? So I think that comes up a lot as well. So that's probably worth mentioning. So that's sort of the 6 signs. What I thought I would do is throw this slide in here about just kind of some closing thoughts to keep in mind when you've already seen warning signs that there's a potential rebuild on the horizon. What are some things to keep in mind as you're sort of assessing that? The first one is pretty obvious: cost. Cost is hard dollars, but there's a lot of other cost as well. For instance, is there going to be a cost or maybe an opportunity cost to new client acquisition because your focus is going to go away from advancing the product or adding something new to the existing product, and instead your focus is going to go towards rebuilding, right? When you decide to rebuild, the name of the game is to pretty quickly and efficiently catch back up to parity where you're already at, but be in a lot better situation. So really being clear about what are the different types of cost and then what are the actual costs of rebuilding. It's a painful pill to swallow a lot of times. So I think, really challenging your logic and understanding what's the ROI, why would this cost or this investment, be worth it for us, right? The next one is what else will get sacrificed? As I mentioned a second ago, when you start focusing on a rebuild, there's a lot of energy and attention goes to that. So what's going to get sacrificed? What new ground are we not going to be able to take with the product because we're taking on a rebuild? You know, what I'll mention on that, what sometimes what we see is clients have to sort of segment teams to focus on these. Instead of taking their product team and just saying, okay, we're not going to do anything on the legacy or the production product that we have right now. We're only going to focus on the rebuild. That's really hard to do in reality. Sometimes what they do is they either augment or they get an outside party or they have to stand up a separate team that is focused on the rebuild effort. Right? So they sort of work in a uninterrupted work stream separate from the team that's focused on maintaining and servicing the existing clients in the production system. So something else to keep in mind there when getting sacrificed. Because what you don't want to do is decide that you're going to do a rebuild and you sort of take a bunch of half measures, because then you get stuck in no man's land and you don't advance the rebuild effort, and you're also like stifling your new product development and the value creation element, right? Enrolling other stakeholders. So once you're clear on cost, once you're clear on what else is getting sacrificed, you're clear on what's sort of the ROI case for the rebuild, you know, from a business case standpoint, you got to do a good job of enrolling other stakeholders. Product owners don't like rebuilds. Engineering teams typically don't like rebuilds. The sales team or the customer services team doesn't like rebuilds, but the people who have to approve the budgets or write the checks like rebuilds even less. And a lot of times they don't have the visibility that people closer to the product would have. So it's really important to make sure that you're really clear and you do a great job of bringing them along in that sort of that thought journey on how exactly are we going to make a business case out of investing this money. So getting those other stakeholders really enrolled in the reason why this effort is necessary, what's the benefit, and what's the plan for that will really help grease the wheels and make that go a lot smoother. And that can also go to my next bullet point on just helping the rebuild story align with what's the longer term business plan, right? So if you're planning to scale and that's a big objective from leadership, then you need to tie any potential ROI or support that would come from the rebuild effort to supporting that big company goal, right? I mentioned the clarity on the ROI on my other bullet point earlier, so I won't really revisit that one again. And then, you know, the next one here that to keep in mind is, what have you learned from the experience that can allow you to avoid repeating similar mistakes in the future? When you don't want to have to do a rebuild very often, so when you do take it on, you do want to make sure you get it right. And so a common mistake that people make when they even build a product for the first time, and even on rebuilds, is they're really anxious to get into building. Let's get into writing it. We know what to do. Let's just start architecting. Let's assign some developers and let's start on that rebuild effort. I would caution against that. Like planning a little bit better. Make sure you got the big questions answered a little bit deeper. Going a little bit slower allows you to go really fast, and it helps really reduce the risk of that sort of overall effort. So really trying to take a moment, revisit what mistakes are we encountering here, and how can we make sure that when we do this, we don't put ourselves in a similar situation again, right? So that's sort of a worst case scenario, is to go through a rebuild effort and end up in the same sort of situation or even worse after going through that, right? So I'll check here and see if there's any questions. Let me see here if there's anybody that has any questions. I don't know, Jordan, too, if you can help me out if there's any questions that came up. Let's see here.
Chat.
Okay, awesome. Let me see here. So looks like this was one that somebody submitted earlier. What is a common mistake you've seen people make when they're evaluating rebuilds? You know, a lot of the mistakes that I see happen can be tied to sort of those closing thoughts that I had. That's kind of where a lot of those points came from, is kind of seeing what mistakes people make. I think one of them is just not recognizing it. They just plow ahead. You know, I think sometimes you get so busy working on the product and trying to make it work that it's hard sometimes to take a pause, back up, look at this from sort of a higher, more strategic level, and really be honest with yourself about what is the root problem, like what is going on right now where we just seem to be frustrated and we're struggling to meet our objectives. I'll give you an example. We worked with a customer years ago that they had a pretty big and complex sort of B2B e-commerce system, and it had a lot of integrations. The ordering flow and process was really complicated, and we kind of came in, you know, a little bit late to the effort. But one of the things that we started to get really clear on is that so much of the plan was based upon an assumption that we were going to use this sort of third-party product that was really central to being able to execute sort of the complexity of the ordering process. And there was all this work that was getting done to customize around it to make it work. And not really the type of customization that is very clean, right? And months and a lot of money had been invested in, you know, customize this, customize that, make this work. And it was really that whack-a-mole situation I talked about earlier, where it was really hard to feel like you're actually getting the win and crossing the finish line. And ultimately what had to happen was take a serious look and question the premise of, should we be basing so much of this solution on this third-party product? Is the benefit of buying that off the shelf and customizing and integrating with it getting us the value that we hope to get, versus in this case, should we build something custom to serve that need, because now at least we can move efficiently and we can solve our own problems. And so I think that a willingness to back up and look at the sort of broader picture can really make a big difference. Looks like we had another one here. What is the approach that you recommend for go-to-market scalability to grow once you have 3 to 4 good-sized SMB clients already onboarded? Let me read that again. So what is the approach that you recommend for go-to-market or scalability to grow once you have 3 to 4 good-sized SMB clients already onboarded? You know, my first thought on that is that at that stage, don't stop focusing on sales. Don't stop focusing on getting users, right? I think it would be easy in that situation once you get a handful of clients to start thinking, oh, we gotta focus on everything's gotta be building the product, right? And so you want to continue to advance your product and improve it, but be really clear on how that ties to getting new sales. How does that tie to getting new users? And I use sales and users, but there could be other sort of guiding key metrics that is important for your business. So I think, you know, a lot of times we'll talk about, you know, your minimum viable analytics, which is sort of like the core set of metrics that you know are really important to keep an eye on and know what they are. And it's sort of all of your effort is targeted towards hitting those numbers, right? And so I would caution against, once you got a handful of users, taking your eye off the ball and focusing too much on all the different maybe feature requests that you get from them specifically, versus more broadly, what kinds of features or functionality or initiatives should I take on that help me go win new business? So I say keep your eye on the ball. Let me think if there's anything else on that. Go to market scalability to grow once you have. I think the other thing that I see is people jump the gun a little bit on starting to go on a hiring spree, right? You get users, all of a sudden you think, oh, now I need to pull the trigger and I need my own total product team, right? So I'm kind of reading this, you know, because you said SMB clients. So I'm kind of reading this from the perspective of a startup company or a brand new product. So I would say that, like, be careful about jumping the gun too much on what you actually need to have as part of your permanent team. I think we did a whole ENO8 answers on a similar topic of this, but I think one of the common missteps that I see there is people go towards, oh, I need to hire a CTO. So now I got users, I got the product launch, now I need to hire a CTO. And it's a little bit of a hot take, you know, like people like kind of look at me funny sometimes when I say that, but because it's such common advice, but I just don't think that's the right path for most startups. In my book, I think for that stage, a lot of times people are served a little better by getting an in-house person that's more of a product manager or a product owner, and you bring that knowledge in-house of what really is important about the product. How does it meet the user's needs? What's our roadmap for development? Helping manage the development team. And then they also serve the dual purpose of really helping with sales. So they can interface with customers, they can sort of be supportive with those sales calls, or helping to get that feedback translated easily from prospective customers to the development team and roadmap and priorities. So I tend to go more towards product owner or product manager rather than, going straight to like a CTO or building a big development team. Hope that helps. I think that came from Vishal. Thanks for the question. Is there any others that you guys want me to address? I think we aim to try to target about 30 minutes. We're getting close to time, but I can take another question if there was another one. Just parting thoughts here. If you have a question, feel free to throw it in the Q&A window there, and I'll try to grab another one before we wrap up. But just a side note, if you guys have other questions or there's topics that you've come across that you think would be really helpful to hear us talk about or address, me or somebody from our team, feel free to email them to us at info@eno8.com, or I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so you can also direct message me over there on LinkedIn. We also have a couple of regular pieces of content that go out that maybe you'd be interested in. We've got a newsletter that goes out once a month. We try to keep it light on advertising ENO8 necessarily. So we really try to curate a handful of articles or blogs that we think probably are valuable to our target audience. So that's a great thing. Go out to our website and sign up for the newsletter. We also have a weekly email that goes out that it's not a big fancy marketing email. It's just we sort of deep dive on one topic that comes up, and it's sort of bite size. We try to make it really actionable kind of information. So sign up for that. You can send an email to info@eno8.com too if you have trouble finding that on our website on how to sign up. So I think that's all we had. I don't see any other questions there. Jordan, you don't have anything else, right?
I think that's it.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate all of you guys joining us today. We've got another one of these that we're working on that we'll probably do in about 2 weeks. So again, if you have ideas, love to hear about them. We want to talk about stuff that's important to you. And if there's any way that we can help you, or if you'd like to learn more about ENO8 and kind of what we do with our customers, then of course, reach out to us. We'd love to have that conversation as well. Again, thanks for stopping in and checking out the discussion today. And hope to see you on one of our future episodes. Thanks a bunch, guys. Have a great rest of your week.